Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about emotional reciprocity. Now, this issue is of reciprocity is like it's central to love. Mutual attraction is for both sexes or same sex sometimes, but it's a very important characteristic in a potential mate. So people like to hear that they're desired. So, a lover wants to be loved in return, to be kissed as well as to kiss. So a lover is ready to be committed, but expects to find similar commitment to their beloved's attitude. And so the lack of reciprocity, that is the knowledge that you're not loved by someone that you love, usually leads to a decrease in love intensity and ultimately to humiliation. And this decrease does not tend to be immediate. The one suffering from unrequited love persists in trying to win the other's heart. And indeed, many books and movies feature their theme, aspiring lovers persisting doggedly to win the hearts of their, beloved. And in some cases, love may even briefly intensify while one tries to win the other's heart. But it's important to understand that reciprocity doesn't just involve love, but love is a central theme of it. It's important in the light of a reciprocal nature of romantic love. It's in the lack of indifference is the big measuring stick, and indifference expresses the absence of preference and the absence of emotional sensitivity. Therefore, people in love prefer to be hurt by their beloved rather than treated indifferently. And I always say this that the opposite of love is apathy. It's not hate. And I always know when there's a couple that I'm counseling that if they're arguing and they're hating each other, there's love there. So there's a possibility that can be fixed. It's when apathy enters the picture that people are entirely in a place that is difficult to come back from. It's really genuine romantic love should involve the profound reciprocity in which each person seeks the happiness and well-being of the other person. And that means we treat each other as if we would like to be treated. And those actions result from this symmetrical, I would say, care, and it may even be asymmetrical as they take into account special personal contextual deeds. But, if we would find it hard to accept the only partner gave the other a birthday present, that would be a wonderful thing. But it's expected that if your birthday is going to be remembered, then their birthday needs to be remembered. And when you don't share that reciprocity, people remember that. It's important. It's important to understand that. So what is one of the fundamental laws of social psychology is the reciprocity principle. And when we pay back what we receive from others in social situations, we're engaging in reciprocity. And if I do you a favor, there's a reasonable probability that you'll do me a favor in return. And social emotional reciprocity is the back and forth interaction that takes place in communication. So we take a kind of a social approach to have conversations with others, and we share our interest in our discussions. But part of the social emotional reciprocity is knowing how and when to initiate and respond to others' interactions. And some of the skills necessary to do this is like talking to someone, making eye contact, demonstrating something, using a chart or a graph, writing a note or an email. How to show that emotional reciprocity is important. You have to provide empathy and support to someone. And some people just lack that ingredient, which the person will return to you, hopefully, in equal fashion when you need support. Behaving in this manner will allow you to develop deep relationships that have a great deal of meaning and value to both people. And this is an important thing to know in life. If you don't get to know empathy, your emotional intelligence is going to always be extremely low, and your life is going to be a great struggle, because it is important for us to understand empathy. It's vital to living in a society, and it's vital to give somebody what they give you. If you show social reciprocity, it's tied closely to emotional. Why? Because it involves social interaction that flows back and forth And so those exchanges and behavior influences the other person and vice versa. Having also a reciprocal conversations means two or more people are exchanging words back and forth to each other like a game of catch. And only instead of a ball, you're tossing and catching words and thoughts between one another. And if you want your relationship with someone to be productive and rewarding, you have to make an emotional investment in that person. A relationship must reach a point where both people emotionally invest in it to do whatever is needed to build and maintain the relationship. Relationships are work. They take time, effort, but they also take an emotional engagement. Both parties need to commit to ensuring there's a reward cost balance in their relationship. And that's where social emotional reciprocity comes into play. Since reciprocity should ideally be a two-way street, you want it to be as balanced as possible. And if it is, there'll be positive reciprocity. If not, then it will represent a negative reciprocity, which is not a good thing. The most obvious example of a balanced, positive reciprocity is Christmas time, when people exchange gifts. However, a relationship can get out of balance in a negative way if one tries to take advantage of the other by asking them to do more in exchange. And this results in unbalanced negative reciprocity, putting the relationship in danger. And so a healthy friendship means that the principles of social emotional reciprocity are used in a positive, balanced way at all times. And it's given what you say to someone is my friend, and to the other person thinks of you as a friend. Thus there's an inherent expectation that mutually beneficial reciprocity will occur. And, that takes effort. It's a commodity. It's something you need to understand. And if you get it, you are magnetic as a human being if you're able to vest in reciprocity, meaning to have a conversation in the same way that another person is talking to you. Every so often, you should stop and take a good look at your various relationships. Are they based on a foundation of positive social emotional reciprocity? And if so, those relationships are well worth not only maintaining, but deepening. However, the opposite is true. You should seriously consider severing the relationship because it is unhealthy and if a relationship is unhealthy and unrewarding for you. But if someone doesn't reciprocate in ways that they should, it's usually best to terminate that relationship and move on. Reciprocity refers to the exchanging of resources, and that could be emotional resources between people. And like lending money or providing a service which can be repaid in a length of time that corresponds to the relationship's intimacy level. For instance, you're likely to repay an acquaintance much faster than you are, let's say, your sibling. Intimate relationships tend to have a longer period of time to return benefits, whereas strangers are expected to exchange benefits almost immediately. And like anything that's more closely studied, reciprocity gets more interesting and more challenging when you consider its nuances. A more intimate relationship tends to be more understanding, but that's not something you should take for granted. And that's an important thing to really get. Within relationships, it's important that reciprocity is actually balanced. And that means you're accountable. That means that you're working on your integrity, your personal integrity. If one person is doing all the giving and the other is doing all the receiving, then the relationship is lopsided, which is exactly what narcissists love. And they love to have those codependent people in their life that will just keep hanging on to them and keep hanging on because they're afraid to be alone. And so, the risk for dissatisfaction and disillusion and dissolutions and dissolving the relationship is entirely possible if it's lopsided. In order to build a healthy relationship, it's always good to know where you stand in the realm of reciprocity and where you need to improve. Now, let's look at relationships like, let's say, a marriage or a long-term relationship. If one person's love language, let's say, is to have time together, that's an important thing. But the other person may need something different. The other person may need, let's just say, validation, a lot of compliments. Now, these are not logical things. These are emotional things. So sitting around going, I need compliments. I don't need compliments. Well, yes, you do. Because some people, that's your character. Other people, it's time together. Time together is an important thing for that other person. So reciprocity means one person in the relationship has to get really good at giving compliments, while the other person has to be really good at spending time together. And the truth is, you need to get good at it, even if you're not. You need to become an expert at it. If you don't meet those needs in a relationship like that and understand how important those love languages are, you can lose that relationship or live in a very drained situation. And it's a difficult thing for people. While a romantic partner may first come to mind when considering the concept, that isn't the only relationship that needs to be fostered by instances of reciprocity. Any relationship that you have in your life, from parents to siblings to friends to coworkers, they benefit from reciprocity. And since this word is all about acknowledging someone's kindness towards you, it can even be something that you practice with deserving strangers. Although it sounds a bit cold, people can start to keep tabs on how much they're giving and receiving. And now, let's talk about the negative reciprocity. Sadly, let's say people give let's say in a marriage or a relationship, you cut the door and you start to say, well, you didn't do the dishes, blah, 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 blah. And then the other one comes back, well, you didn't make the bed, blah, 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 blah. And so they keep fighting each other. So they're giving each other negative reciprocity rather than lowering their defenses and being empathetic. Yeah, I didn't do the dishes. That was not good. Let me go do that right now. Simple things, being accountable. If you're a good person with reciprocity, you are accountable for what you do and what you say. Conversely, if people aren't giving enough, you can let them know and allow them the time to make adjustments. And if you've communicated your needs, nothing changes, it may be time to move on. Satisfaction and commitment build in a relationship that is balanced with reciprocity. And in most cases, it comes down to open communication, clear expectations, and above all, mutual respect. The healthiest relationships are the one in which both partners are fulfilling each other's needs on a regular basis. Families have different norms of regarding reciprocity. Some families require immediate repayment, whereas other families don't keep track of who or what has been done and when. So it's important to know how family members feel about reciprocity, because sometimes relationships dissolve when these expectations are unclear. For example, if a sibling loans their brother or sister a large sum of money to make a purchase, they feel the repayment is taking too long. Relationship ending disputes can happen. With friends, it's important to communicate expectations of reciprocity within friendships, because everyone has a different expectation regarding how long a repayment should take. For example, some people believe that when you go out for dinner or drinks with friends, then they will alternate who pays. In other friendship circles, there's an expectation that if one pays the bill, each person should render their part immediately. And when money is not involved, such as when the resources are being exchanged are time and emotional support, there might not be an expectation of repayment until the provider is in a similar situation. With coworkers, work relationships tend to be formal, so they would follow the immediate exchange rule unless coworkers are considered to be friends. And in order to ensure that work relationships stay productive and drama-free, it's really best to follow kind of the stranger rules where you pay quickly. And, when you look at romantic partners with reciprocity, these relationships have expectations of months or years for repayment because they're among the most intimate. And the only type of relationship that might have more relaxed rules for exchange would be family. And so the types of resources exchanged are not necessarily parallel. For example, one partner might provide emotional support while the other provides financial stability. And in general, both partners require love, so it's expected that the resource is regularly exchanged and not one-sided. Very important to understand that there's give and take. There's always give and take. With strangers, it often occurs in like a marketplace transactions with the purchase of goods or services, sometimes through a stranger. They might provide a benefit with no expectation of the favor to be returned, and that's altruism. And usually the benefit ascertained by a giver is feeling of positivity. So no further benefit is expected. This could include opening the door for someone, offering food or money to someone in need, engaging in volunteer work. It's always a good idea to do this. You get something out of that too. Emotional reciprocity exists when you provide empathetic support to someone, and when you're in need, that person meets you at an equal level to provide you with empathetic support. So it's mutually beneficial relationship with balanced levels of give and take. And so relationships are grounded in emotional reciprocity, and they provide some of the deepest, most meaningful things we have in our life. Some people are just complete givers. They just give, 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 give. But oftentimes they run out of gas and they run out of resources. You have to give to yourself before you begin giving to others. That's an important thing to understand, that you have to take care of yourself in order to have the resources to offer emotional or any type of reciprocity. And a lot of people that call themselves givers they have a resentment and a chip on their shoulder because they don't get a reciprocity, because they act like they don't need it. But the fact is they do need it. And it may just be thank you. It may just be, another type of gesture. But it's so important to understand that when people give to you voluntarily of their own free will, it is expected as human beings that we return something to them in one way or another. Somehow, but it needs to be balanced. You have to also ask yourself, am I drained? If you spend time with somebody that drains you, you need to give to yourself and get away from those people. Whiners will steal the soul straight out of your body. People that whine constantly are people that they want you to sympathize with them and just sit in a hole with them where they're at and whine, but they don't offer solutions. And those kind of people in your life are toxic. And so it's important that there is no reciprocity that you can give them or that they can give you outside of listening to their whining about life. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about emotional reciprocity. It's easier to express reciprocity in cyberspace because it requires, fewer resources and real actions. And self-disclosure is often greater, actually, in cyberspace. So reciprocity is most evident in cyber love, which consists of very long conversations. These can sometimes last as much as a few hours every day of the week. The conversation is essentially reciprocal activity, and long conversations can take place only when genuine reciprocity prevails. So the reciprocal nature, basically, of cyber love is also expressed in the significant mutual self-disclosure that often takes place on cyberspace. And it's important that many people would rather have that than be able to communicate. In this day and age that everybody's online, people have very poor conversations in person oftentimes, or very surfacey conversations. But when they get into cyberspace, all of a suddenly they're going into the depths of their subconscious and revealing themselves in a much different way, simply because they have less accountability. They can basically ghost each other by just taking off and never coming back. And a lot of people do stuff like that, and it really hurts. Some people really deny the importance of reciprocity and love by taking it to be a mechanical, involving calculations of what each person gives and what each person gets. Such a calculation is incompatible with genuine love. And it's really, when you do something for someone you love, you don't do it because you expect to get it in return. You do it because you want to do it and believe it increases your partner's well-being. Romantic love, genuine, it is built on profound, absolute reciprocity in which each person seeks the happiness and well-being for each other. Now, what's different is as a parent. It's less dominant reciprocity in parental love. Like a mother or father can love their child, even if at this point in their life they're extremely ungrateful. At the heart of a parental love is responsibility rather than reciprocity. Nevertheless, reciprocity does play a part here, as through sometimes through a lesser extent. Unrequited love, which lacks reciprocity, is painful because it damages your self-image. When romantic rejection is perceived as irrevocable, it's humiliating, and it hurts your poor self-esteem, as it reflects a significant and negative valuation of your worth. And so we deeply want someone, but this person doesn't care for us. Someone who we believe is extremely good and suitable for us may not think that we are good enough for them. People look for heavenly love. The intensity of love and the perceived unity of lovers creates this honeymoon effect, and it's an illusion of feeling secure. And we all want that. And the desire to live happily ever after in the safety of your partner's arms underlines romantic love. However, love is not safe, but rather risky. And lovers are quite vulnerable to the risk of being separated from the object. And so the dynamic and unchanging nature of romantic reciprocity constantly threatens the existence of love. So, there's a lot of complication. There's a lot of intensity in a painful situation of being rejected. And in such a case, it's hard to interpret romantic rejection as normal behavior, because that could happen to anybody. And there's no normative framework in which a rejected lover can find consolation. And so, the framework they believe in denies any option. And so, it's important that people, when they fall in love, are taking a great, enormous emotional chance. And it's important to understand that. And if you're not feeling it for the other person, it's also important for you to gauge how you can reject that person in a way that's not going to be damaging to their self-regard. And a lot of people can do some really hurtful things, like disappear, ghosting, or making the other one think they're crazy, or denying responsibility for leading someone on, and it's a sad thing, but a lot of people avoid conflict. And so they will withdraw reciprocity and hope that person emotionally, and will hope that person will no longer engage them again. And some people will just keep coming, looking for that emotional reciprocity to someday crack through the armor. And sadly enough, those people often can get hurt. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's important for us to understand that when we're not receiving any type of reciprocity for what we're giving, no relationship is going to grow. And you need to take that as a red flag that, hey, it's not happening, so I'm going to have to fix this. And that's an important thing to understand within yourself. You have to fix that within you. Most of us do not consciously think about reciprocity in our intimate relationships. When we do, we might say, of course it's important, but we need to make it a conscious and recognizable thing that we have to do. And reciprocity is not something that's exact, but because what one person can do, the other person may not be able to do very well. So reciprocity and cooperation are so valuable because we do have various strengths and weaknesses as people, and we need to honor that. Although people have long recognized the importance of reciprocity, many people have, they just don't verbalize it. But it's a value. And it's a value that if you're going to have relationships in your life, especially in intimate relationships, you really have to get to know emotional reciprocity. And people need to be appreciated. They need to be taught. You need to communicate to each other about the give and take. It's important. And it can be difficult or impossible to develop and maintain if one partner in a relationship believes that they are and must be superior and in control. And once again, this is what narcissists and most personality disorders have a hard time to understand. They'll take the oxygen out of the room only for themselves, and they give nothing to others. And yet they don't even realize that they do that, and oftentimes a narcissist will use people as objects. And then they give no reciprocity for that once they've used them. And, it's really a person who is highly competitive may have difficulty also understanding and learning how to create reciprocity in an intimate relationship. Reciprocal relationships require a spirit of cooperation, as well as an understanding and an ability to embrace interdependence on one another. And so cultivating that, and in a committed relationship, both people must have and be able to continue to nurture feelings of love for each other. Reciprocity does not have to have anything to do with money or giving physically. It's mostly can be honored emotionally. And it's also developed and woven into good enough relationships, sometimes without participants knowing what it is they're doing. With awareness, it can become robust, healthy feature of the relationship when you know that that is something that someone in your life needs that you're giving. So reciprocity requires people to be invested in their relationship. And if a relationship is important enough to them, partners will be emotionally invested in it enough to work at building and maintaining it. So commitment is sustained through the improvement of the balance, the reward and the cost balance that you have. And so reciprocated love is relating to feeling fulfilled. Reciprocated love and emotional contribution are behavioral instruments that sustain a committed relationship. And to get that is really powerful. It's really powerful to understand that. Now, reciprocity also plays a big role in our Christian spirituality. If you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you believe in any kind of God, that's a reciprocal relationship. That's what prayer is for, is to pray for what you need. And God will reciprocate, by honoring him, by praying, by getting on your knees and humbling yourself. It's important to understand that we need people in our life and to not be able to engage other people in our life and develop those magnetic relationships. Sadly, what happens is we become lonely. And if you're a person that's lonely with very few friends out there, you are not good at emotional reciprocity, or you're trying to hold yourself from it because you're afraid you'll give too much. To create a reciprocal relationship, both people need to be able to accept responsibility for that creation. And and this is why friendships die. The interdependence of a healthy relationship requires that both people accept personal responsibility. One partner can't take all the blame while the other gives all the blame. Acceptance of responsibility for the creation of a reciprocal relationship takes a lot of investment and a lot of emotional maturity, and it's always a work in progress. It's experiential. And that's important to understand because there's going to be failures. There's going to be negative reciprocity when people argue. That's negative reciprocity, but that means there's somebody's not taking accountability. And to be in any kind of meaningful relationship, you have to take accountability not only for what you do, not only for what you say, but for what people perceive in you. And you've got to be willing to hear it and take your defenses down and reciprocate by responding with a humble, responsible response rather than a defense. And oftentimes people will walk around each other because they get defensive very, very quickly. When two people decide to develop a healthy, interdependent, reciprocal relationship, it's really smart to take the time to talk about their personal value system and about the characteristics they believe create a healthy relationship. For instance, some people value affection as an important part of a healthy relationship, and while others don't. And in such a situation, reciprocity will be difficult. But if you're going to be in a relationship, you're going to have to be good at giving to your partner what they need rather than what they want. And needs and wants are two different things. And needs are emotional. And that means they're not logical, and they can be embarrassing, and they can make you look surfacey, or they can make you require too much attention. But the fact is that if you're in a relationship, you cannot be embarrassed about talking about reciprocity. It's an important discussion that anyone should have. Respect is another value that needs to be discussed. And asking another to define respect is an excellent place to start the discussion. I would say respect is simply understanding reciprocity, but I also convey that respect is listening. And the best person and the most powerful person in any conversation is the listener. They are dictating the conversation rather than the person that is talking. The listener is a very powerful role for anyone to be in life. And if you are a good listener, you're going to have lots of relationships in your life. But you have to be patient, and you have to be intrigued by human nature, and you have to be intrigued by friends, and then you have to also have humor, because there's a lot of silly things that we do as people, and it's important to like that. Respect has to be reciprocal. That means each person needs to be able to articulate when they feel disrespected. That involves philosophy, politics, professions, principles, intelligence, creativity, parenting, personal growth. We're not all experts at stuff like that. We're not even close in some departments. But it's important for us to have those discussions, and on whatever level each other is, without playing a power trip on it. If you're better at philosophy, don't just knock someone over the head who doesn't know philosophy and expect them to be at your level. Even if somebody is interested in philosophy, they may not be as well read as you are. The bottom line is we're not all experts at everything, but we want to improve. We want to get better. A basic building block of an intimate relationship concerns how people define reciprocity about the exchange of goods and labors. So it's prudent and it's important to have these discussions about those issues. In other areas, such as your relationship, it's emotional reciprocity, there's physical reciprocity, there's sexual intimacy as reciprocity. And some people are a one-way street on their sexual intimacy. And that's sad too. It's a terrible thing that one person would not be willingly giving in a reciprocal manner in a relationship, in sexual intimacy, where you're at your most vulnerable, and not allowing your partner to have just as much pleasure as you do. And sadly, many people just want to receive. They don't want to give. You should really re-examine a relationship if it's based on that kind of thing. Negative reciprocity also is when a behavior has a negative effect on a person, and then they reciprocate with a behavior that has equally negative effect. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. People react to each other without thinking. They get emotional. They say stupid stuff. They start venting and spewing. They take little accountability. They defend, but never listen. And sadly, it spirals out of control. And it's like a bad opera, but they just never hear each other. And sometimes these are in the most intimate relationships you have, like marriage, where people just don't have the capacity to hear each other because they may not like how each other sees the world, or sees or not like the parenting, not like your decisions as a person, whatever. This is how people grow apart. And then they just sit in limbo in their marriage and do nothing, and they just are miserable. And it's sad, for intimate relationships to grow and become healthy, lasting, committed, reciprocal. Reciprocity is really vital, and that differs from reciprocity that occurs maybe at work, but it's important. If you don't have that discussion, if you don't get into it, you're going to have a lot of bad things happen. Let's just talk about leadership. We live in a world fueled by greed. I know this is negative. People that are worship themselves, artificial relationships that lack any depth or any purpose, any meaning. A company's good intentions to build momentum through partnership and mutuality is met with the act of deceit sometimes when the other party attempts to get the most out of the situation and doesn't really contribute or add value to the relationship. One-sided relationships appear to be the sign of the times, however. More than ever, we're seeing companies and their leaders that are in search of intellectual capital and know-how, but they lack the need to compete, and they implement unethical practices that really don't help people. Like companies these days are loving the idea of hiring contractors that they don't have to form much of a relationship and they can just work them to death. And the reason that they do stuff like that is because they can let you go really quick, and they don't have to pay benefits, and they don't have to deal with retirement, and they don't have to deal with your family, and they don't have to interact, and they have very little commitment. You're more of a thing than you are as a person. And not that that's a bad thing, but that if you need to have some kind of a career, that's an important thing to be able to do. But the idea is that when you join a business, when you join a work, if you have good leadership, the leadership will invest in the people, and it's a reciprocal relationship. They will give back. They work for the people. Good leaders work for the people that work under them. That is their job. And it's important to take care and to lift up and to motivate and to take people to a different level in their life by utilizing their talents and complimenting them and rewarding them for giving back to the business. It's an important understanding. Commitment with work is an important thing. Great leaders do commitment really, really well, and they do reciprocity really, really well. You want to build a mutual beneficial business relationships. That is more difficult than you would possibly think. It's not just about whether you can trust someone anymore. It's whether you can expect the other side to add value. And these days, leaders are beginning to expect more from their employees, their clients, and their partnerships without any reciprocity. But you can't lead alone. Leadership requires relationships that add mutual value. And the moment a leader takes the relationship for granted, there is no relationship. You're no longer secure. And leaders don't often realize the impact that they have on people if they lack a sense of empathy, if they lack a sense of commitment, if they lack a sense of being human, and if they lack reciprocity. Unfortunately, leaders try to avoid to hold on to business relationship for the sake of having a connection to a particular brand or a particular people, and only to learn in the long run that the relationship was not worth the time and the frustration. Moreover, if you look at the way our society is going, people are retiring oftentimes in their 40s and their 50s, not because they want to retire, because they're forced to retire. So, businesses, big corporations are just dumping that population back into the workforce, and these poor people are having to swim with maybe not the job skills that the younger people have. And it's sad, but they commit their life to a business. They think they're going to go spend many years there, and then they're just basically booted. And that tells you the formula of relationships with business in this day and age. Unfortunately, leaders must know how to anticipate the unexpected to most effectively evaluate business relationships. And so when you take that into granted, you know that you have to have, ideas of how to do this. But first of all, to avoid falling into traps of a business relationship, you need to look at one thing. First of all, there's always an excuse. If there's always an excuse in a business relationship, you know that your relationship lacks reciprocity. When you feel forced to do all the work because there's always an excuse on the other person's end, when the excuses begin to constantly prevail, this is a sign that your business relationship is becoming one-sided and the other side is feeling threatened and uncomfortable, territorial, and distant. If you want to have frustration and damage, put the relationship to a test. Demand more from your business relationship. And if the performance doesn't improve and the attitude lingers, do yourself a favor and end it. Also, there's some toxic things here that you need to notice as a leader. When both sides don't take ownership of the mutual benefit of the relationship, it's time to reevaluate it. How many times have you been in a business where everyone is equally excited and then it begins to wane? More often than not, these are the relationships where one of the parties is beginning to lose marketplace relevancy and their impact starts to fade. And this, my friends, happens so much in this world of people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, that where people are basically irrelevant. And it's important that they stay with integrity and they stay with knowledge and training and reinvest in themselves so they can have relevant value in our marketplace today. People have been using for years the drive to growth, and sometimes they're not producing results. And here we are in the COVID thing where a lot of people have very little value to offer right now because we're all sitting at home, and some people are in industries like restaurants and in various places where they can't have a great relevant value. And that can be a very sad thing. It's difficult to sustain a business relationship when you're the only one that is able to take ownership and remain relevant because your team or your brand overshadows the strength and the capabilities of the other. So if you're going to be a leader, you have to keep people relevant. That's an important aspect. And also, if you know that a lot of business relationships are created from an impressionable encounter or introduction, but over time you find that reciprocity becomes difficult because the people that are responsible to manage the relationship have limited capabilities. For example, leaders at the top of an organization may seem to be impressive. They say the right things, make a lot of promises, like people in politics. But the reality is that those who are responsible to do the heavy lifting to give the relationship life may have the average competency, and you discover that. Many times when people are in the honeymoon phase of a business deal or they're trying to get business from each other, they basically are putting a lot of fluff out there, and then all of a sudden you find out what they're really selling is not very not very helpful. And their relevancy falls. And what they say they could do doesn't happen. Business relationships grow complacent to the point where one of the parties begins to take the other for granted. That happens. And when that's happening, you need to reevaluate it. What does that call for? That calls for rebuilding the reciprocity in that relationship. Negative actions are often reciprocated with negative actions. Just yell at somebody who basically didn't see you, and maybe you're walking down the street, and see what the response you get. Negative reciprocity is a behavior that occurs when an action has a negative effect on someone, and that someone returns with an action that's approximate as the negative. It's tit for tat behavior, and it's childish. You don't answer negative reactions with a negative reaction, yet our instincts tell us that we need to do that. You try to respond with grace. And that is what we as people that do that rise up off our hind legs and actually become human beings when we respond from negative to with grace. Society views negative reciprocity actually as a fair transaction. And, punishment in judicial systems levies for an illegal act. Society views jail time for robbing a bank as fair reciprocity. A court levies death penalty for somebody who basically killed someone. As a general rule, fairness is in negative reciprocity requires that negative action be balanced or proportionate to what the other person has done. While negative reciprocity is neither healthy or unhealthy, but all forms of reciprocity can at times be unhealthy. For example, negative reciprocity occurs in most relationships, often in an unthinking manner, which can generate a lot of unhealthy reactions. So when negative reciprocity creates unhealthy or bad feelings, someone needs to step in to those involved parties and recognize the pattern of behavior. And this is what we do in therapy, is develop reciprocity for one and the other when you're doing relationship counseling. is to be like a referee or to be a mediator, to try to really communicate what people are missing about each other and how to make that relationship thrive. Generous acts that generate uncomfortable or unethical obligations can be something extremely difficult to deal with, that if somebody has resources that are way far beyond what you have and may give you a generous gift. But the fact is that if we can't somehow reciprocate, that can create a problem. People bribing you, or people in business have actually created rules about gifts because they don't want you to have reciprocity that is only rewarding for you. In business, it needs to be rewarding for the business. It's used to manipulate people. It's used to manipulate people to act outside of their organization. There's people often that plan and plot how to guilt people into reciprocating for them. How to bribe people. That it needs to be a synthesis of a normal behavior, and there needs to be ethics when we're talking about reciprocity. Ethics. Persuasion by reciprocation is based on the law, but it's considered to be the most powerful law of human nature. And it basically, the statement is, if you do something nice for me, I'll do nice things for you. I feel obligated to reciprocate. For example, if we go out to lunch and I pick up the bill, maybe you'll pick up the bill the next time. And stuff like that feels good. Going to Starbucks, let's say, and you're in line and you pay for the person behind you. That's really kind of a cool thing. And all of a sudden, the reciprocity I hear, because I've never worked at Starbucks, but I hear that people goes on for maybe 2 hours where people are buying for the person behind them. And that's a kind of a neat reciprocity that feels so good. But we're not looking at the gift to be acknowledged. We're giving the gift because we want to feel better about ourselves. Emotional reciprocity is very simple. It's somebody says it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you. I know you're a busy person. That's really cool that you take the time to meet me. Thank you for your time. This is an important thing to offer when someone says, goodbye, to say goodbye. When they say hello. It's emotional reciprocity. And if you find it too surfacey, you don't understand. It's building a foundation of a relationship. Material and financial, yes, that's a part of it. We have a deep psychological need to be even with other people. And if a person does something to you, we feel the need to get even by doing something evil or nice in return. And so if someone decides to hurt you, you want to hurt them. But that's not nice. You need to rise above it. And I know that sounds crazy, but then that means you're training yourself to answer negative reciprocity with negative reciprocity. And also if you're a parent, you're teaching your kids to do the same thing. The law of reciprocity is to do good things for other people. Be nice. Something as simple as opening the door, getting someone a cup of coffee is a really nice thing. And it can cause people to like you, even if they don't know you very well. The Socratic method means simply, ask a lot of questions. The more questions you ask of another person and listen closely to the answers, the more the person's going to like you. It's important. It's important to have that kind of communication. All right. Enough about this. That's our show. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can do that from our webpage at voiceamerica.com, the Empowerment Channel, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, do what you did at the beginning of a relationship and it won't end. That's Anthony Robbins, by the way. Most people enjoy long romantic walks to the refrigerator. Also remember, the difference between adults and children is that children will sing in the shower and adults will make life decisions there. Now, if you could talk to wine, you made a promise that I would become sexier, smarter, funnier. I saw the recording and we need to talk. That's what you would want to say to wine. All right. Thank you for listening, everybody.